That should work. Hello and welcome on Back to Basics with Graham Randall. I'm Baptiste, I will be your host. I invited Graham to create that platform because I think it's really important that along the way, people can find reliable information about a topic that is scourged with disinformation and misinformation, even if it's by goodwill. Welcome, Graham.
Welcome, Baptiste. Hello, how are you doing?
I'm fine. A bit tired. So I would like to begin by asking you where your interest in UFOs begin.
My UFO interest began because I was interested in science fiction at an early age, and the covers of the books which I saw in the shop were fairly similar, and I picked a UFO book up by accident one day, read it, and realized it wasn't fiction, it was non-fiction. It was about supposed facts. So people were seeing things that they couldn't explain, things like lights in the sky or certain types of craft, the flying saucers, UFOs, all these kind of terms that were used. And it really intrigued me. And these were things that I thought were only the stuff of books, and they weren't in real life. Now, even at a young age, I was still questioning things. So stories of people seeing spacecraft from maybe from somewhere else, aliens, etc., if you like. That's how it was portrayed in the books back then. Sort of did pique my interest as this. So really, is this sort of thing going on? So I read more books on the same subject. I was really interested in it, but at the time there was only so much information, and it was the books had stories of, yes, I saw a light in the sky and it moved around, or I saw this strange craft that zipped by. In some cases, people saw them landing, and occasionally people described occupants. There was all those kind of stories, but there was very little else to the stories. They were very short. There wasn't much evidence. It was people, well, hearsay, basically. As I read more, I realized that there were some cases which had supporting evidence. Some had photographs. Some had photographs of trace evidence, i.e. markings on the ground where craft had landed, allegedly. And then, of course, the sheer weight of information that I was reading from all these books, maybe 100 or more, after about 5 years of reading these when I was younger, I realized that there was this huge weight of information that, okay, if it was only one or two people seeing, some random things in the sky, maybe a dozen people, 100 people, then you might just think it was people, hallucinating or making up stories, trying to write something in a book so they'll make some money. But because it was 100 books and there were hundreds of more people in each book, so all different people telling their stories and various photographs, etc., there seemed to be more to it than just people trying to, what we say, pull a fast one, try and make things up. And then, of course, you fast forward a bit to 2017, and the New York Times article came out, and the videos that were released through TTSA, the To the Stars Academy, and they were much more credible. So you had military-grade equipment which was recording what appeared to be UFOs, for want of a better term.
Mm-hmm.
But also you had very, very credible witnesses. And these were people who had gone through an immense amount of training, not just to fly an aircraft, but to fly an aircraft from a very, very small, in relative terms, ship at sea. And that's extremely dangerous. It takes a lot of training to be able to land an aircraft on a carrier, especially a jet aircraft. So these were very, very capable people, and also very technical, and also very highly trained, and very trustworthy, I felt.
What you said was very interesting. You thought it was fiction, and you realize it was non-fiction, because I think that's what most people actually are feeling today. They have grown up in a world where X-Files told them it was just fiction and narrations, and they realize it's facts.
Yes. So that was the same at the time, because so these first books I was reading were in the mid 1970s, so 1975, 1976. And back then we had science fiction films on television, in the cinema, and there were plenty of science fiction novels. It was quite popular back then, even back then. And I was reading Isaac Asimov stories, which had pictures of spacecraft on the front. And some of them looked, they looked really good, and they were quite. They drew your attention to the books on the shelves. And of course, the UFO book that I picked up had a similar picture on the front. So to me, that was just another type of the same type of book. And I had it bought for me. It was put in the basket in the shop, and my mum bought it for me. And when I got home, reading it, it didn't. When I was looking at stories about things flying through the skies and spacecraft effectively landing in the desert somewhere in New Mexico, etc. This all seemed like a build up to some kind of, well, a build up of the start of a novel. But then when I started reading it more and understanding what was going on, then clearly it wasn't fiction. It was people trying to tell us a story that had actually happened. So it was fact, at least according to them. Now, it was then up to the reader to work out whether they believed it was true or not. Because, okay, you read a story and you read a story in a newspaper sometimes, but it's not necessarily guaranteed to be fact. It could be just one person's word against another. So when you look at the early accounts of somebody seeing a light in the sky which they didn't understand, or something that actually looked like a craft of some description, but they couldn't reconcile that with an aircraft or a balloon or a glider or something else mundane, that's when it got a bit more interesting. And that's when it got into the realms of, well, there's something to this. It's not just somebody making something up. And there were too many stories along the same lines, but in different places around the world, different times, because obviously they had the year and the date, etc. So I could tell, even at an early age, that these things were happening, from the 1940s right through to then the present day, 1970s. And not just in America, they were happening in France, in Britain, in Norway, in Sweden, in the Far East, in Australia, you name it, they were happening there. So it wasn't just a few people making a story and maybe just a few people who knew each other, who were telling each other, oh yes, we'll get together and make this kind of story up, some kind of little conspiracy just to generate some headlines or some publicity, etc. It was a lot of people throughout the world, a lot of people who just didn't have any contact with each other, some people who had never even heard of UFOs before, never really read newspaper articles, all the rest of it. So in terms of witnesses, they were free of what you call contamination from the UFO topic, and they had no axe to grind in terms of coming up with the stories. So yeah, so there was a big weight of evidence as well as just all this kind of stories, the photographs, the pictures of impressions in the ground where things had allegedly landed. It just seems that there was something to it. It was more than just a story.
And feel free to deflect the question, but what would you say after such a long time interest on this topic to someone that just realized it existed?
So what I would say there was that if you think there is nothing to it, then that's fair enough. But don't have that belief until you've actually delved a bit deeper into the subject, like I did. Make sure that you have a little bit more information, and I think as you get that more information, you'll come to the same conclusion I did. You will find that there is more to it than you expected. You will see that people have these experiences, and they may not all be sort of what we expect to be like an encounter with a UFO or some other unknown object, but just keep reading and keep assimilating this information, and bear in mind the type of evidence that goes with these statements. Some of them, as I've said before, are just stories, but some of them also have extra information to go with them. So they will have pictures, or nowadays there are moving pictures. There are cases such as the Nimitz encounter in 2004, where there is not just somebody's story of seeing something, there is a lot more. There are sensor data to go with it. There are other witnesses involved. So it's not just one person saying, I saw something. It's 3, 4 people saying they saw something at that time. And then independently, another set of people in another plane seeing something again. So you have cases where there are multiple witnesses all saying the same thing, or variations of the same thing in a fast evolving story, together with sensor data and other testimony from elsewhere. Now, all this together makes up for a very compelling narrative. And when you put it all together, not just these stories in isolation, and not just the Nimitz story in isolation, you go back to actually World War II, which is part of my interest in terms of UFOs, and you go from there right through to the present day, and you'll see all these different stories, all these different encounters, all these different cases, and all this information, a huge amount of information, and then ask yourself the same question: is there something to this? And that's when you might have your mind changed. You might think something different.
So earlier you talked about the credibility of witnesses, and I think Barack Obama today, as a political figure and reference for many, is among the few people on earth everybody believes. I'm talking across the globe.
Yes, I agree with that.
He intervened a few hours ago, and I would like you to hear that.
Okay.
If that works.
No, look. The truth is that when I came into office, I asked, right? I was like, all right, is there the lab somewhere where we're keeping the alien specimens in spaceship? They did a little bit of research, and the answer was no. But what is true, and I'm actually being serious here, is that there's footage and records of objects in the skies that we don't know exactly what they are. We can't explain how they moved, their trajectory. They did not have an easily explainable pattern. And so, I think that people still take seriously trying to investigate and figure out what that is. But I have nothing to report to you today.
Okay. So what do you make of it?
So what I make of it is that the section when he talks about the seriousness of what he's talking about, he's quite uncomfortable. He seems to be caught on the hop, if you like. He's unprepared for having to answer that particular part. He's a bit more hesitant in the way he's talking. However, the earlier part, he's making a joke of it, and he actually ends that clip with a joke as well after the serious part.
Exactly.
And it's a good way of dealing with a subject that you might not want to talk about as well. You can just deflect through humor, but also you have to wonder how much, in terms of, because the host started laughing as soon as you start talking about Area 51 and asking about where the lab is and all the rest of it. And you just wonder how much the people who are laughing know about the subject. Because if they knew a bit more about the backstories to these things, in terms of Area 51, for instance, or to do with Roswell or the rest of the things that people tend to laugh about, they might not laugh so much. Because I think a bit more information and a bit more in terms of credibility and a bit more factual sort of detail would take that humor out of it. Because they would then maybe realize there was more to the story than just what they might see on TV.
And what I really noticed that he's a really good actor. He can really act. When he wants to act, he acts. And he is dead serious while saying the joke. If you look at the gestures, he's saying the joke right there. He's dead serious. The others in the room laugh. He is dead serious. Really, really like it. The laugh was unexpected, I think. And then he insists on the seriousness of the topic.
He does, yes. Yeah, and it was that's the bit that people have picked up on this time round. And there's also the fact that this is the closest he's probably come to actually saying that there is an issue that needs addressing.
Absolutely.
Now, you can leave Area 51, you can leave all the rest of it, all the other things that he's been asked over the years out of it. But this is where it's important. Because of the things that are going on at the moment, which have been happening over the last couple of years involving the US Navy, in terms of encounters with UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon, he clearly knows there's an issue here, because he wouldn't have said that. He wouldn't have said that something needs addressing and something needs looked at, would he?
His hand gestures mimics a fighter coming to a UFO,
Yes.
and the UFO just going like a bullet.
Yes.
That's really interesting to watch.
He is trying to sort of mimic the kind of movements that you would see on the forward-looking infrared screen, the
Exactly.
radar, the kind of screen that you were seeing the images from. Yes, you're right. What he's doing. Yes.
Look at the eyes. Look at the expression of the body when he says that. He knows the weight of the subject. So the other piece that was really interesting was the CBS 60 Minutes piece. What did you think of it?
So the morning, well, there's two pieces on the Sunday. The section in the Sunday morning wasn't so good because there was a lot of weight given to skeptics and effectively debunkers about the subject, who dismissed the whole thing without looking too much into what was going on, I felt. And there wasn't much sort of time given to people who were trying to just push the argument in so much as there needs to be more information. There needs to be a better approach at trying to get data and then analyze the data. And I was quite disappointed in so much as that a scientist or somebody from SETI would dismiss the kind of argument that you should actually try and get more information so that you can make a credible attempt at trying to explain something that you don't understand, which to me would be science anyway. And scientists, that's what they do. If they have something that they don't understand, they research it, they test it. If find that doesn't work, then they go and find something else to test it again. But they don't dismiss things out of hand because they don't understand it. Or they don't make glib or just off-the-cuff comments to explain something away when they don't understand it either. That kind of behavior went out in the 14 and 1500s, as far as I'm concerned. So that was the first bit. But the segment here, where you've got the graphic there, the evening segment, was much, much better. It didn't try and tell people right, these are aliens, these are extraterrestrials, these are people who are going to abduct everybody. It didn't start with that premise. That is not what this is about, and this is not what any of us are about. It seemed to be a genuine attempt to suggest there was an issue, and it was an issue that needed looking at. They laid out the facts of particularly the Nimitz case, and just told it as the pilots saw it and experienced it at the time, quite matter-of-factly.
2 minutes.
It sounded fairly dramatic, but that's how it was on the day in question. They showed the film, they spoke to the pilots, and that's what they did. And they didn't then try and work out what they were. They asked the pilots, but obviously they don't know. And in another segment where they'd asked Alex Dietrich as to what she thought it was, she said, well, we need more information so that people who are more qualified than she was in terms of scientists and intelligence staff they would have a much better sort of grasp of the information, and they would be able to maybe come up with some kind of determination about what is happening and what these things might be. And I felt that was all really sensible. It was measured, and it was non-sensational. There was nobody playing X-Files music. There was nobody with pictures of little green men or trying to, keep questioning someone. Well, where do you think they're from? Are they from here, there, whatever? Or what are they doing here? There was nothing about they, because the question isn't about they. We're not even at that stage yet. We're at the stage of trying to get recognition there's actually an issue, and then getting more information about the issue. And this seemed to be quite a good attempt by the media to actually sort of portray an issue which people in the past seem to have been very reluctant to engage with, in terms of in terms of media people anyway. So this was quite a groundbreaking segment, especially for 60 Minutes. And it's the first time in 30 years, I believe, they've actually in the 30-year history of 60 Minutes, they've actually covered UFOs, and they did cover them extremely well. There was no laughing, there was no smirking, no sort of, kind of being people looking uncomfortable talking about it. Even the host seemed as though he was treating it as though it was just another social issue or a political issue, and he was questioning politicians or whoever. It just seemed to be very, very normal. The tone, the questioning. There was nothing sensational about it or nothing jokey at all. It was very, very serious, I felt.
So what I really like in that segment is that the UFO is mirroring the fighter. It means it's aware it's there, and not only it's aware, but it doesn't automatically respond by making a run for it or directly going for the fighter. It reproduces the movement of the fighter in 3 dimensions.
It does what somebody else would do in his place. If he was, say if that had been an aircraft and he'd been the pilot of it, whatever that was doing exactly what he would have done if he was in it, if he was flying it. It's responding to a potential threat or something that it doesn't understand nearby. That is, that's the kind of reaction that you would expect from an adversary, possibly, or something that, is making sure that it doesn't get caught out by somebody's military aircraft in the neighborhood. It was quite startling that it reacted in that way and made sure that it wasn't going to be intercepted, caught out, call it what you will. It was very dramatic. I mean, even actually just step back a bit from this particular bit here, this most striking thing I felt that for people who don't know too much about what's going on here in terms of a UFO case was that there were actually two former US Navy pilots, fast jet pilots, in the same room talking openly about an encounter which had happened, and quite a major encounter as well. So that's the first thing to consider. So that's almost unprecedented. And then their testimony is clear. It's quite sharp, even though it happened 16, 17 years ago. So then, of course, you go back to what they say about this, whatever it was, the Tic Tac, seeing or detecting rather Fravor's aircraft coming down at him in a circle, in a sort of spiral, and then the Tic Tac turning, as he says, it goes boop, and it stands up on its tail, or well, it doesn't got a tail, but it stands up on one end and then just shoots up towards him, as I say, mirroring his movements. So it's sort of in the same area as it. So when they're going round, it's following his movements. So the jet can't get on the Tic Tac's tail. It's a classic kind of maneuver to stop yourself being disadvantaged in what you would call a dogfight, to my mind anyway. And I believe that is how Fravor looked at it as well, because when you have seen him or heard him being interviewed separately from this program, he talks about a kind of, well, not quite a dogfight. I don't believe he calls it a dogfight, but he certainly calls it, in terms of it as an engagement, where the aircraft and the Tic Tac, were effectively going round in circles. And at one point, he turns his jet to try and cut off part of the circle so he can get either next to it or directly behind it, and that's when it shoots off. So it's one of those engagements.
What I find really interesting is that the Tic Tac doesn't fly like a plane. It can fly any shape it wants, any trajectories it wants. So it was mimicking the flight of a plane, and the same flight as the fighter plane that was coming to it. And I may be overinterpreting, but in education, mimicking is the first way of learning. The first way for the brain to learn something is to mimic what it sees. And it's the very first communication there is towards other beings.
That's a very, very good point. When it was seen first of all, when it was above the water, it was bouncing about effectively. The people have said Dietrich and Fravor have said that it was just moving about randomly. Fravor was closer. I believe Dietrich has said, but I can't remember because she's certainly a lot higher up and she's flying top cover for Fravor. But Fravor definitely, when he's been interviewed, has said that the object was simply just bouncing about in a random pattern above the water, with no apparent logic to how it was moving around. It was almost like it was a ping pong bouncing around in a bottle, kind of thing. And then, as you say, as it detected the jet coming down towards it, it then moved in a much more, not predictive pattern, but in a much more recognizable pattern, in so much as you say, it was mimicking the movements of the jet in a much more circular fashion rather than this random fashion. So it may have picked up that and been able to mirror it very, very quickly. Now, there were no wings on this object. There were no tail surfaces. There was no method of, or observable method of propulsion, and yet it moved. And it moved quickly. And it moved purposely. When it was moving around randomly on above the water before it started mirroring Fravor's jet, it was moving instantaneously from rest. So it wasn't as if it was slowing down to a point and then moving off again in a different direction. It was moving to a point and then just moving off in a different direction straight instantaneously. It wasn't sort of coming to rest at any time. It wasn't making turns like an aircraft would, because aircraft have to bank in order to turn. You can't really turn an aircraft in a flat plane. It doesn't work that way. So it was odd, the object, to start with. It defied any kind of description in the way it was moving to start with. And then when it started moving upwards, mimicking the jet, that's another kind of part of it entirely, in so much as, did it learn how to do that? Or was it capable of doing that anyway? This is another question. And that's a really, really good observation, Baptiste.
Thank you. And I think we can say that with even our best level of technology, we have nothing that can cancel inertia.
No, that's right. You'd have to be able to slow down, first of all. Let's go back a bit. Is it, as we understand it, I use the term manned, but I'm not saying there's a man in it. But something biological is operating it. If that's the case, then at the speeds and the kind of maneuvers it was making in terms of hitting a point in space where it just moved off in a different direction without even slowing down, stopping, accelerating again, that would kill a normal human being. It would kill pretty much any animal on Earth.
And a gruesome death.
Exactly, death. Yes. It would spread your body across the walls of whatever that craft was inside. We can't stand those kind of G-forces. And so that's completely out of the picture. So therefore, you have to work out you would have to then try and work out what was inside it, what's controlling it, or if anything was controlling it in terms of some kind of entity, a being, whatever. Or it could be just remote controlled, or it could be autonomous somehow. That's a question for another day. But
the problem with inertia is, even if it's not biological driven, machines can't handle that much G's either. The plane just dislocates itself.
That's right. So there's the next question. How come the Tic Tac stayed in one piece throughout all those maneuvers? Something that we couldn't build. We can't build even a drone that could fly to a point in space, in the air, and then change direction without slowing down or without banking. From such a high speed as well. It's impossible. We can't do that.
It's really important that we emphasize that. A drone can be very, very fast. The max theoretical limit is Mach 17 at the time. What we are talking about is changing direction instantly. That destroys everything we know.
And not just changing direction in terms of maybe 45 degrees or 30 degrees or even 90 degrees. So in terms of an L shape, some of the maneuvers that have been suggested were almost, going in the reverse direction. So an obtuse angle. And that is completely crazy. If it was rattling along at several, it looked to be from the kind of footage I've seen, or in terms of interpretations I've seen, and the testimony from Fravor, it seemed to be going very, very fast, zipping around over the water. And that just, I can't even conceive of something that can do that. And I suggest that we haven't got technology that can even do that anyway, and it can't even be thought about yet. And for something that doesn't have any kind of control surfaces over it, that's another thing. How does it control its flight? How does it come to a well, it doesn't even come to a halt, but let's say, for argument's sake, it's slowing down and then speeding up so quick that we can't see it, if that makes any sense. How can it do that? How can it come to a point in the air and then just reverse direction without any observable change in the craft? It's almost preposterous, really, and yet it was seen, and yet it wasn't just seen by one person; it was seen by two people, Fravor and his weapons system operator. They both saw it doing this.
I think that the problem is that most people didn't experience flight. When you are in a plane, you feel the forces on the plane, and you know very well when you try to reach the limits that the plane will just not hold it. It's the laws that apply to the plane on a physical point are very restrictive, and to see two fighter pilots with their whistles describing something that moves and change direction instantly, and these people are trained to have much better reflexes than anyone else on Earth, that is impressive.
Yes, very true. They were saying something that was, maybe several hundred years ahead of whatever they were flying. The characteristics of this object, whatever it was displaying, levels of flight and levels of capability, not just the speeds, but also the maneuverability that was beyond anything that anybody at the moment could probably even theorize, never mind actually build. It was just, well, they were incredulous. They still are incredulous as to what this particular thing was.
When you know the price of the airplanes in the Navy, that's a bit scary.
Well, it's the equivalent of somebody flying around in a World War I biplane coming against what they were flying. And actually, that's not even a good analogy, because whatever they were flying, you'd have to go a couple of hundred years in the future to get the difference between a World War I biplane and whatever that was. But let's just look at it that way. It was streets ahead of what they were flying, and at the time they were flying a state-of-the-art, Super Hornet. So, and you can still see today that they just don't understand what they saw, and they're highly trained fighter pilots who are trained to recognize other aircraft because they're potential threats. So they would know about the gamut of foreign types of foreign aircraft from the Chinese Air Force, from the Russian Air Force. They would know about drones, such as they were back then in 2004. They would also know about other flying objects in terms of gliders, balloons, commercial aircraft, and they would recognize them, because remember, their flying career wasn't just confined to being at sea. They'd also undergone basic training ashore, at shore bases, where they would have seen other aircraft flying around. So they've had plenty of and then before they even get to a carrier, they're then flying other jets, more basic jets, to get experience on flying those types of aircraft. So, and then they transition to Hornets before, and then they do that somewhere else, and then they move on. So there's a lot of flight hours sort of amassed before they get anywhere near the sea and before they get anywhere near a carrier, a vessel. So they're well used to seeing other aircraft in different situations, and that's not what they saw. They still say that's not what they saw. They don't know what they saw, but it wasn't something that we can explain. And something that's 40-odd foot long, shaped like a tic tac, has no wings, no tail, no exhausts, no air intakes, no rocket exhaust coming out the back. Nothing to what we would think you would need to be able to move something through the air. That still defies description.
A thing of that shape going above Mach 20 would just shatter the air.
Yep.
The
And the next thing
boom
is,
would just be nuclear at that point.
it's not even aerodynamic, the shape.
Yeah, exactly.
as we would think as an aircraft. If you gave an aircraft designer a brief to come up with a Mach 20 aircraft, for want of a better description, probably the last thing he would come out with was a tic tac shape with a couple of little aerials or horns or whatever coming out the bottom of it. I would have thought that would be pretty low on an aircraft designer's list of options.
I think so.
I'm not an aircraft designer, but I would have thought that would be the case.
So most people dismissed that part, but I find it very interesting that they managed to pick up these objects once they had an upgrade on their radar.
Yes, they did. Some people have suggested that the kind of threshold in terms of radar technology is getting to the point where the US Navy and others can detect these objects, whatever they are. It may be no accident that a lot of reports have started since 2004. Again, I don't have enough information to be able to say, well, that's true or not. Maybe other people do. But it seems strange that in terms of the Spy 1 radar that was on the Princeton, the ship that was accompanying Nimitz that picked up these objects at the time in 2004, and then of course, as you say, the upgrades to the radar for the F-18s, and they started seeing these objects. Then you just put two and two together, and it's a possibility, but it's no more than that at the moment. But there's certainly to say that they were seeing things and encountering things off the east coast of America as well in 2015.
And I didn't prepare it, but the Drive just published an article showing another generation ahead of radar system where the entire nose of the fighter is the radar and has a very high definition, and they can only imagine that we will detect even more UFOs now.
That's right. So you go back to, I'll go back to World War II, because again, that's my specialty. And a lot of the things that were seen back then were never picked up on radar because the radar simply wasn't sophisticated enough. It was barely sophisticated enough to pick up enemy aircraft in certain conditions. So, and then of course you move into the 50s and 60s, and you have some what they call radar visual cases where objects were picked up on radar and then aircraft were sent out to investigate them and objects were seen. But some of these stories, a lot of these stories still need more detail and more information to actually tie them down to being 100% accurate. Whereas nowadays, we have much more sophisticated sensors, we have much more sophisticated radars and recording facilities like what you're seeing on the screen at the moment. So therefore, they're much more credible when you come to today's stories. That's not to dismiss the stories from a while ago, but we have much more information nowadays that it's much harder for someone to come along and say that can't be right. That there's something wrong there. There's a reason why this is being picked up, and it's not what you think it is. So yeah, they're much better nowadays.
So that part is really interesting for me because that's the one part of the whole segment you can put in science. It's reproducibility. You need to be able to reproduce what you observe.
That's right.
If somewhere on Earth there is one spot where they appear every day, game over. We can study them. And it's a theory for the West Coast, where at the large of Catalina Island, there is apparently a zone where a lot of UFOs are detected. And one of the theories is that the Navy is conducting exercises to study these UFOs.
Yes, that is true. So there are particular hotspots, and there have been hotspots throughout the world since the UFO, it became an issue. So since the 1940s, there have been what they call waves and flaps, which are groups of sightings. One is a term for a small group of sightings over a certain area, and a wave is where it's almost worldwide, and you have multiple sightings over a long period of time. So, and you got waves and flaps like this in the 60s and 70s, but now we're finding that specific places over a longer period of time seem to be associated with the phenomenon. So, as you say, around about Catalina Island, off San Diego, off Los Angeles, but also slightly further out to sea there, where this particular incident happened, the Nimitz incident happened, sorry. And then, of course, off the east coast of America, which just also happens to be a military training area at sea, the cruise, and it's not just Graves said he saw the same thing, every day for 2 years. I don't think he actually saw objects every day for 2 years. I think he was talking more general terms about the squadrons, not just his squadron, but the other squadrons on the carrier that he was assigned to. But nevertheless, what you were saying is it holds up, because it's a recognized area and it's a recognized period of time, and there are multiple sightings over a longer period of time in that particular location. And as you say, that gives the grounds to be able to study them, because if you're going to see the same thing or the same type of things every day or every few days in the same area over a period of time, then that gives you the opportunity to study them. Maybe like these objects are studying the US Navy.
I really like the last sentence. They are watching us every day. That's really interesting, coming from a fighter pilot.
And that's going to be worrying from his point of view as well, because they are out there to defend their country, and they can't do it. They can't do anything about this, can they?
No, that's why I really like Graves, because we, in the other case with Fravor and Dietrich, we have a video that has been filmed later in the day. Here we have the video and the pilot of the plane who took the video. So we have that mirror effect when he hears himself reacting to the object. And at the time, he was enthusiastic, and then he's scared.
Yes, and also the bit that didn't show in this is the drawing that he made of the other objects that were behind that particular one. There were 6 or 7, I believe, in a kind of horseshoe shape. So there were other objects that they could see on the sensors. I don't believe they saw them with their eyes, but that's got to freak them out as well, because it's not just one object, as you say, potentially spying on them, for want of a better term. There's a whole, as they said in the video, there's a whole fleet of them on the SA, on the situational awareness sensor. So it was, that has to be really unnerving, Phil, because a fighter pilot on a carrier is effectively defending the carrier and also the other ships around it in that particular area, that particular part of the sea, and they don't usually have other aircraft getting so close, or if they do, they know they're there. They can go and warn them off. They fly alongside them. You've probably seen all the pictures of Russian aircraft flying, nearby, and the aircraft fly alongside each other. They'll take a few photographs of each other, and they'll wave and all the rest of it. It used to happen in the Cold War as well. RAF pilots used to do the same in the North Sea, with the Russians coming down from around Norway. But that's a known threat. These aren't. These are something different. That object, when I first saw that object, the one that rotates, to me, that didn't resemble anything that I was aware of. Didn't even look like a drone that I could recall seeing a picture of. I don't want to use the term alien to mean extraterrestrial, but it was alien in so much as it didn't resemble anything that I was actually aware of.
Exactly.
I had no frame of reference when I looked at that, I couldn't say, I couldn't even say what it was, and I still can't say what it is, because and that's just with my limited understanding. When somebody like Ryan Graves says that, then you have to sit up and take notice, because if he doesn't know what it is with his experience, then that tells you that there is something to that, in so much as nobody knows what it is.
Yes. And the way it's rotating is very weird. If you are in a plane and you are banking to make a turn, you don't randomly rotate your craft. You are wasting fuel, or you will create tremors. It's a very weird rotation to have while being in the turn, and the angle of the turn doesn't change depending on the rotation. It's a really weird movement.
Well, it almost looks like it's turning on its head as well, if you can call it.
Yes.
If it has a head, it's not turning in the way that you expect from an aircraft. As you say, it's not banking the way that it would. It's the whole thing itself seems to rotate on its axis, but not in a style that an aircraft would, and that itself looks not otherworldly. It looks, to use the phrase again, it looks alien to anything that we understand in terms of how aircraft operate, which again was really, really sort of striking when I first saw that video. And I can still see it in my mind, even though I can't see it on the screen. I can still see that object turn like nothing else on Earth would. So where's that technology coming from? Has somebody invented that somewhere? Because if they have, that's a huge leap to my mind anyway. Notwithstanding all the other maneuvers these things have been been said to be capable of, and that alone just set off little alarm bells in my head, going, "What is this?"
Yes. Yes. So the next part, the next excerpt, is a cut I made from an interview of Radcliffe, who was the former Director National of Intelligence. And it's very fast. I had to stay under the minute, but it's really interesting.
Frankly, there are a lot more sightings than have been made public. Some of those have.
So, the big reveal, there are a lot more sightings that have been made public. I was amazed that it was really important for many journals and news outlets to hear that from a former DNI.
Yes, and I think this is just the tip of the wedge. I think there are more people out there who understand there is an issue. We don't know how much information is out there in terms of knowledge of facts, but there will be knowledge of cases, and that's a different thing entirely. But there will be other cases out there. That's not a question that you need to answer, because we know that, because information is coming out all the time. Jeremy Corbell's video that came out the other week, that means there is more, and we know there is more. They said there is more, but to have somebody in the former DNIs say that, now that's credible. You have to sometimes work out why they're saying things, but you can put that to one side for a minute, and you can just listen to the words, and that's not something that you would have heard 20, 30, 40 years ago. They would keep quiet. These people would leave office, and they would retire happily, and they would go to their graves without saying a thing. Whereas now, they're coming out of office, and I believe he wasn't out of office that long. Was it last year he was in office?
Yes,
and within a few months of resigning or retiring from his position, he's on national television saying, "Yes, it's an issue. Yes, we have more cases. Yes, it needs investigation. There's something to this." That's unprecedented. And of course, with James Clapper coming out the other day and saying essentially the same thing, then it's not just one person for some reason coming out and saying it, maybe because he has a book to sell or some other reason. It's very, very, it's exciting actually that people are now prepared to come out the woodwork and risk whatever political capital or friendships or relationships or whatever they have still with the people they used to work with. You know, why? Because you think they might be burning bridges when they're saying this. They're cutting links, or they're sort of destroying any credibility that they may have. Well, I don't believe that's the case. I believe they're telling the truth, as they see it. Again, I don't know how much information is out there in terms of what all this information means, but the information itself, yes, there is more to come, and there is more locked away.
Since so many officials began to speak openly about the subject, there was a whole part of the ufology that screamed to disinformation or misinformation. But I think they are just interested in knowing the answer of the question. I don't detect lies in what is saying by these officials.
I think that it's always been theorized that there's a lot of people who work in unnamed departments and different parts of the military who deal with this information on a day-to-day basis. Now, these people, if they exist and for whatever job they do, they're all human. And there will be, like in every organization, in every branch of the military, that you have different opinions about the jobs that people do. And so you will have some people who will follow the program and they believe in the reasons why things like this are being kept hidden or kept secret. And then, of course, there will be other people who will think, no, this information should be probably given to the public. And they'll be everywhere in between those two positions.
Mm-hmm.
But because of their oaths and because of what they've signed to do the job they're doing, they're not allowed, and they respect that oath that they've taken, so they don't release the information, even sometimes when they come out of office. But we're seeing now that people are prepared to say things, and they can say things where they're not going to be jailed for saying it or whatever. They can go so far. I mean, obviously, Ratcliffe may well know about other cases and does, I'm sure, but he can't come out and say it. He can only say, yes, they exist. But then the implicit bit behind that is, but you're going to have to find out that for yourself. So he doesn't come right out and say they're there, but he does give the hints that they are.
Let's hear the rest. There's a very good part inside his introduction.
Have been declassified. When we talk about sightings, we're talking about objects that have been seen by Navy or Air Force pilots or have been picked up by satellite imagery.
Sentence, when I heard that, I had a smile on my face. Because to have a satellite imagery of a weird craft, that's something I would like to look.
Yes. So we're not just looking at somebody taking a picture of something anymore. We're not even looking at a military-grade sensor such as the forward-looking infrared system or even the radar system on an aircraft or a ship. We're now looking at other systems, other monitoring and other recording systems which are not just on Earth, but they're in orbit. And also, if you remember to the Joe Rogan Experience interview with Christopher Mellon, he mentioned other platforms such as the Global Acoustic Monitoring System.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there appear to be a lot of monitoring programs and systems and equipment in operation around the world and also in orbit, which that information that they hold, now they may not be specifically designed to pick up what we would call UFOs, but they retain an enormous amount of data which could be used possibly in conjunction with eyewitness accounts and other kinds of sensor information to build a picture up of cases when they happen and potentially going back in time to historical cases, because it's like a jigsaw puzzle. We're only looking sometimes with one piece or two pieces. Out there's a whole load of sensor arrays and platforms and equipment and systems which may record all the other pieces or some other pieces. So you might not get just one piece, which you can't work out what the picture is. But if you get 10 pieces put together or 100 pieces put together, you got a much better idea of what the jigsaw puzzle looks like and what the picture is.
Yes. It's corroborating data. It's
it is,
really
very
interesting.
true. Yeah.
that frankly engage in actions that are difficult to explain, that movements that are hard to replicate, that we don't have the technology for, or traveling at speeds that exceed the sound barrier without a sonic boom. So in short, things that we are observing that are difficult to explain. And so there's actually quite a few of those. And I think that that information is being gathered and will be put out in a way that the American people can see. We always, when we see these things, Maria, we always look for a plausible explanation. Weather can cause disturbances, visual disturbances. Sometimes we wonder whether or not our adversaries have technologies that are a little bit further down the road than we thought or that we realized. But there are instances where we don't have good explanations for some of the things that we've seen. When that information becomes declassified, I'll be able to talk a little bit more about that.
The former GNI says that he can't identify what is happening in the skies of the first nuclear power on Earth.
Yeah, that's quite a statement, isn't it? So you have the former director of national intelligence, not just some low-ranking sort of clerk somewhere in a little back office, but it's actually the person who is the director of national intelligence, saying that there are things flying around that we don't know what they are. They've got tremendous capabilities and they're a potential threat, and yet they can't do anything about them. Now, you can imagine if this was the Cold War, and let's just put UFOs aside to a minute for a second, and you had like Russian jets or Russian Bear bombers or Badgers or whatever flying off the east coast of America, and the Russians and the Americans couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't warn them off, or the Russian aircraft flew over America, or over carriers and all the rest of it. It was just and got right in their faces. There would be a huge outcry. It would be the same as back in the Cold War if these Russian aircraft were overflying the UK. We used to send aircraft up to shepherd them away when they got too close to our airspace. But imagine if they could just fly over with impunity and we couldn't do anything about it. That would be a huge scandal when it would be a huge intelligence failure or a huge military failure that people who are supposed to be charged with looking after the defense of a country can't defend it against, well, whatever these objects are. And they can just come and go as they please. They can run rings around the best aircraft that a nation has, and there's nothing they can do about it. And so, yeah, it's crackers, utterly crackers.
And I looked into it, and I couldn't find a proper rule of engagement just for violating airspace. But if it was a Russian bomber, it would be a casus belli. It would be a declaration of war immediately. If a Russian nuclear bomber had that behavior over the American skies.
Certainly over the American mainland, it's a bit less sort of clear cut out at sea and away from sort of their own sort of 12-mile limit or whatever you call it. But the last thing that any sort of carrier admiral looking after a fleet would want is a potential adversary flying over their own little airspace around a carrier. So that's why they have these jets, and that's why they tend to warn other aircraft off. They'll fly alongside them and just sort of gently shepherd them away from a fleet and all the rest of it. But even just being able to know what you're up against, that's the first thing. And Russian aircraft were recognizable. They could tell what they were. I can tell what they are from pictures. I know enough about Russian aircraft to do that. But these things are something else, and they don't even look like the drones that people know that the Russians and the Chinese have. So there's another thing again, that yes, okay, they're Chinese or they're Russian. Well, if that's the case, how the heck have they managed to get this kind of technology? And why aren't they actually using it to their advantage? Why are they just flying around, just sort of making a bit of a fool of American aircraft? Aren't they doing something else with it? You would think you'd be able to take over the world when you had technology like that.
Yes.
So.
No, exactly. So then we had Clapper, another, how can we say that? Major official talking about the subject.
High-ranking official, yes, definitely.
UFOs, because a former Navy pilot gave an interview to CBS News in which he says flight crews observed UFOs off the Atlantic coast every day. Here's a clip from that.
Let's go ahead.
So you're seeing it.
Report is expected to be made public on the sightings of UFOs. As the former director of national intelligence, I think there have been a lot of theories about UFOs. What do you make of these revelations? What might this be? Have you seen any yourself? What do you make of this?
Well, first, I think it is kind of, there is logic to the intelligence community addressing this, since the intelligence community has a lot of practice of dealing with ambiguity and less than complete facts. And secondly, I think it's really important that whenever we witness such phenomenon, that it is recorded and documented for the future. When we may gather more information and have a better understanding of what's transpiring. Could there be life out there? Sure. As huge as the universe is, you really can't reject that possibility. So I think this is a good thing. The transparency, I expect this report will be filled with ambiguity as well. And people, depending on their leanings, will extract what they want out of this report.
How it always goes, right? Where there is ambiguity, people can pull what they want from it. But it does sound like it is, something that we haven't seen before, this type of transparency around this topic.
Yes, and I'm not sure why that is. The only reason to me, for classification would be if there's some sensitive method that data relating to so-called UFOs was collected. But other than that, I don't know why we haven't been more transparent about it in the past, and I'm part of that crime, I guess. And my former capacities were, I didn't insist on more transparency with respect to this issue.
That's a very interesting statement.
Definitely. He recognizes he was part of the problem, in so much as the lack of transparency. Just go back a bit to when he first started speaking about recording the information. I mean, that was interesting, because it was almost a recognition of failure to record things in the past.
I also want to turn now to talk to you about.
I don't know whether that's true or not, because
yes, I'm not sure why that is.
Was that before or after that?
Oh, I can't remember when it was. It's fine. We don't need it, actually, to be fair. He was talking about like having the need to record this information for the future. So so to me that almost suggests that they hadn't been doing a very good job of it beforehand. I don't know whether that's the truth or not. There's certainly been evidence to suggest that they've had programs in the past where they've tried to record information about the historical encounters and all the rest of it, but you just wonder how much information they managed to get with the limited type of sensors and the limited types of recording apparatus that they had back in those days. Whereas now the information, the equipment that they have is much more sophisticated, both on aircraft and on ships, and also ground-based radars, and also all the other sensor platforms that we were just talking about before. So that kind of details may not have been available to much earlier versions of the kind of task forces and other types of whatever kind of secretive units that might have looked at this information. But the recognition that they do need, or this is coming from another former director of national intelligence, the fact that they do recognize a need to start recording the information, and presumably in some kind of logical and repetitive fashion, doing it the same way all the time, means that there's a need to build up an amount of information that they can have a proper look at it and a proper analysis. And that might not be possible yet, because they may not have enough information to do so. They may not only be able to come up with a limited analysis. So, but then again, because there's no transparency, or there's very little transparency, then we can't on the outside judge how much information they have to play with, and we don't know how much they have to interpret or to analyze or to come up to any kind of conclusions with. But we might find out next month.
Another point that I found interesting, that when Radcliffe came out with his declarations, he was attacked because he was a former GNI for Trump. And
Yes.
people bashed him, saying, "You don't know what he's talking about. Forget it." That's a GNI from Clinton
That's right.
saying
Yes.
the same thing.
Yes. So a lot of people are trying to say at the moment that the UFO issue is non-partisan, and that is true because officials from various types of administration are saying the same things. Now, I've heard also criticism about Marco Rubio because I believe he's a Republican, and
Yes.
I believe he's looking for possibly a ticket to sit in the White House himself, and that might be true. However, that doesn't mean to say that the message that they're saying should be rubbished, should be forgotten about, should be criticized. You know, we should just forget that the fact, whichever side they come from, and actually focus on what they're saying.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because whether they're on the Democratic side or the Republican side, they're saying the same things. And
Exactly.
so Clapper and Ratcliffe are saying pretty much, almost not quite word for word, but they're saying essentially the same thing, that there's an issue that is recognized, that it's something that they don't understand, that it's unknown, and it needs further information to be able to try and understand it, let alone deal with it. So, yes, it's a non-partisan issue.
So we began the talk by saying that the credibility of witnesses was primordial.
Yes.
We had a former president of the United States. We had three Air Force, Navy pilots.
US
Sorry,
Navy pilots,
I'm-
yeah.
they will bomb me now. Navy pilots and two former GNI.
Yes.
I think at the credibility level, that's very good.
So do I. You don't get much more credible than the President of the United States, for one thing. And especially somebody like Obama, who people respected. They may not have agreed with him, but they certainly respected him as a president. Whereas, okay, the pilots are really, really well trained and are very professional, but some people will write them off because they'll think that they don't know what they were talking about. And they may, yes, okay, they may question the political orientation of the former directors of national intelligence. However, they can't really get away with that with a president, and especially one of Obama's standing. For him to come out in the way he did, yes, I know it was hidden between two little bits of jokes, but actually that was a major thing. And that's the closest he's coming to admitting saying there was a, coming out and just saying straight away, there's a problem that needs to be looked at. So yes, there's a huge shot in the arm for the people who are looking for very, very credible witnesses or commentators. That's not to say that Fravor and Dietrich aren't credible, because they are. They definitely are. But Barack Obama, yes, that people sit up and take notice if he said something, even now, after how many years he's been out of office.
And in the CBS interview, we saw shots from FLIR cameras on the fighters. So it's opening the discussion for materials that can be found, either debris or footage captured by military instruments.
Yeah.
And it's all began with the New York Times.
Yes, it did. And that was December 2017, so it was 3.5 years ago now. But
yes, so far and so close.
There we go.
Do I have it? Can you read it?
Yes, I can just hear it. The subtitles are there, so you can see those as well. So again, this is the gimbal footage with the object before it rotates. So that was when if you looked at the story on the internet rather than the newspaper, it was just a case of, wow, what is that? And then of course the story itself was nothing short of amazing as well, because it blew the lid on this mysterious UFO program, according to the title.
Incredible, please. Incredible, please.
And especially for people who weren't aware of it, for this story to come effectively out of the blue, and just hit them with, not only is there a program studying these things, but actually there's a former leader of the House, Harry Reid, who then also supported it, and senators who also backed him up in setting it up. That was a revelation, certainly was.
And Mr. Reid isn't any senator's former majority leader, a legend in his state, and the quote, I think it's one of the good things I did in my congressional service. I've done something that no one has done before.
Yeah, out of all the things that you can mention, all the things you can say about what you've done as a politician, and for someone to say that speaks volumes as well, doesn't it?
So we had FLIR videos, but they've been tailored to reveal absolutely nothing from the devices that took it. So they are from very poor quality.
And they're not even the entire video, are they? Because you don't see the beginning and you don't see the end. So there's more to see, I'm sure, somewhere.
Yes. And I think Louis Elizondo said that it was the least disturbing part of all videos that was put out.
Yeah,
I really liked that scene. So there were other physical traces that have been investigated. The most famous one is Dr. Jack Vaillant, who in 1998 published an article. Let me pull it. Where is it? So, physical analysis in 10 cases of unexplained aerial objects with material samples. I love that title. And if you scroll a little, you find that, how do you say it? A sheet? A spreadsheet?
It's a table of
table.
Yeah, it's a table of data.
And if you look closely, you have all the major cases of crash with the elements that have been gathered. And he has been working on that for 2 decades now. I think the paper, the next paper he's publishing will be an isotopic analysis of these components. They are already weird because if they are meteoritic, it's very, very weird meteorites. Because, for example, one of the most cool is Ubatuba, and it's made by magnesium, almost pure magnesium. It's almost impossible to have one meteorite made only of pure magnesium. And when we say pure magnesium, it's above the industrial standard for magnesium when it's produced in the industry. So it's really weird already. And what he's looking for is isotopic ratios, meaning the number of neutrons inside the atoms, and that defines its physical properties under high energies level. And what he's planning to reveal is a new method that makes comparison between different materials, so we can detect which are the weird meteorites and which are the real debris from UFOs, and then we can do further analysis on that.
So this is good stuff because it actually records information about the various materials that have been recovered or found at sites that are alleged to be from UFOs or from trace debris, and that doesn't seem to have been done before, or if it has been done before, the results haven't been made public. So to have it in this kind of format and also open for peer review, I believe, yes?
Yes. It's under peer review. It's under
okay. So that's important as well, because it's not just somebody putting out information and saying you have to accept this. It's what I believe is true. Jacques Vaillant is actually putting it out to other people who maybe even are more qualified than him to actually interpret the information, to look at it, study it, and essentially pull it to bits to try and destroy it in terms of a theory, or to find out whether it's inadequate, or to find out where it's false, or where it needs more work. And to do that, that's a proper scientific method, rather than just a collection of stories which suggests there's something happening and saying, oh yes, this was found here, that was found there, with no real evidence, or no real attempt to actually investigate it, to actually look at it scientifically. This is a much better method of doing it, and hopefully this will reap some kind of dividend. Even if it turns out that there's an irrational explanation, then it's a way of looking at the information from the various cases. And I've always been on the belief that I don't mind if some of what you would call the sacred cows of UFO of law are actually dismissed in the end, because it can be proved that they either didn't happen, or that they are something that's rational. I'm quite happy with that, but I'd rather that happens to a point of where I can look at it and go, yeah, you're right, rather than having this continuous, well, it might be, it might not be, we think this is what it is, we're not sure. I'd rather have a decent sort of attempt at trying to look at it, and this looks like a good way of doing so. It's a proper scientific method of recording the information, opening up to peer review, getting other people to look at it, other people to study it, and then coming up with some kind of working theory, working answer to say this is possibly what it is, and then looking to the future to recording other future cases in the same way, and repeating, recording, studying, etc. And that's science. That's how it should be done.
And that's something that is really poorly understood. But a scientific paper is a punching bag. It's put out. Its sturdiness is tested by peer review, but everybody can take a jab at it and try to destroy it. It's designed for it. And if you can destroy it, it's true.
Yeah.
It's a very, very good process.
And that's how it should be. We shouldn't be looking at UFO cases to protect them. We should be looking to test them, and test them thoroughly. We always look at people who debunk cases as if they're doing something wrong. Now, okay, you can look at people who say these things and dismiss them out of hand, but they are doing effectively what Jacques Vaillant is doing from the opposite direction. Sometimes their methods don't necessarily sit very well with us, but the better ones actually do come up with kind of working theories as to what things are, and we might not like what they say, and we can usually put holes in their theories as well. But that's how it should work. You should be able to come up with a theory about what something is, or why something happened, and then put it out there for people to look at it, and then, as we say, pull it apart, to destroy it, to use it as a punching bag, and find out what's wrong with it. Because it's healthy to actually open yourself up for scrutiny, and open your work up for scrutiny, and open the cases up for scrutiny. And I'd rather people look at them and point out potential places where there's room for debate, argument, etc. And then that can be discussed to a point of where people are happy with the outcome, rather than just having one side saying, oh, it's this, and the other side saying it's that. And that gets everybody nowhere.
That's a very good point. And scientists are prepared for that. They don't mind you take a bite of it. Their research, it's here for that.
Yeah, the good scientists are anyway. There have been bad ones who have tried to push things through without too much in the way of scrutiny. But you're right, the ones who genuinely understand and believe in what they're doing, they're only too happy to have other people look at them, and then also point out maybe where they've gone wrong, because not everybody who is doing something understands what they're doing in terms of where they may be going wrong themselves. They may have gone down some kind of blind alley and then not realize it, because everybody's human. Even the best people are human, and there may be something that they've overlooked, and that somebody else with a fresh pair of eyes comes along and goes, hold on a minute, you've missed this bit, or you've forgot to do that, or that's a wrong hypothesis. And that's where this kind of thing scores, in so much as other people can look at it and suggest or criticize, constructively, and offer ideas, and then that's how you progress. And this might not end up the way it is now. It may evolve, and hopefully it will, with some outside input. So that's what we can look forward to. But yes, that's the best way. You test it. You test it to destruction, like you would an aircraft when you're testing it before it goes into service. You make sure that you can try and break it, for instance. Yeah. So
and
yeah, that's what they do.
It's major problem of today's science. For example, 1 year ago, a counter study of articles published in psychology found out that only 30% of the discoveries could be reproduced.
That's a really low amount.
That's a very, very low amount. So it's really important to openly attack other papers, because it's not done enough, even in science by itself. There is very few teams that actually tries to reproduce the results to check if it's true or not. And we have false results that happens every time now. What I would like to show you is to link back to our first point of the talk. We talk about hotspots and clusters of cases. And this is a spatial point pattern analysis of the unidentified aerial phenomena in France. It was made by Michael Vaillant and its team of mathematicians. And he designed an algorithm to represent location of UAP sightings in France. And this is the map. It's only we call them UAPD class. It's really, really unknown. We have a lot of data on what is seen, but we can't identify it at all. At all. The light spots are where the concentration is the highest. The blue spots are where the concentration is the lowest. And if it was something natural, like a psychological effect, it would be all the same color with just spots on the concentration of population. In that map, the concentration of population has been corrected. So it's like every habitant in France has the same density. So the spots you see on a big town, for example, here Paris, means there are really, really a lot more UFOs above cities than anywhere else on the land. What is really interesting is all the other spots that you can see, and they don't correlate to density in population. They correlate to polluted areas and nuclear waste or factories. That's the three major components of that map. And that's what you obtain when you have clean data you can extrapolate. That's 50 years of sightings above France and around 500 cases.
Wow. I've never come across that before. That's amazing. Because my first thought when I saw that would have been that you would see more cases because they were in centers of population. But as you say, that's not necessarily the case. It's more to do with all the areas where there's been pollution or nuclear waste or nuclear facilities. So yeah, that's really, really interesting. So what were the findings for? What were they trying to suggest from this? What do they think was going on?
There is no interpretation. That's just a lecture of the data. Okay. And the hypothesis was that, according to the literature by, I think it was Hastings, that wrote about the correlation between nuclear sites and UFO sightings. And they tried other variables like solar radiation for the cloud coverage. The more radiation you have on the ground, the less clouds there is, and they checked if there is an influence of the clouds on the sightings, and various other variables. And the three that explained the most of the data was population, but largely above what you would expect when you correct the population level. Nuclear facilities, including ballistic missiles, and polluted areas.
Okay, that's interesting.
If you want to see a UFO near you live, find one of these 3 variables.
I'm trying to remember what your military's nuclear. I mean, I don't know whether you know what your military's nuclear kind of capabilities are. Do they have submarine launched, and do they have land? And it's called the force. It's called the force de frappe, isn't it?
Yes,
I think,
yes.
Yeah.
Nuclear deterrence. We have it's transparent in French.
Okay. Do they have land-based missiles as well?
Yes,
launching sites. Okay, so there are launching sites within mainland France. In other words, I wasn't aware of that. I knew they had I thought they had submarine launch ones, but I didn't realize they had land-based ones as well.
The fact that in 1966 France left the NATO.
NATO, you did, yeah.
At that time, we had to be able to defend ourselves against anyone. So we have a lot of nukes.
Okay.
A lot of nukes.
So there are silos, in other words, like they do have in America and Russia. I see. That's interesting.
That's the little points you see there.
Okay. I've now learned something today about this subject.
That's very interesting, and that's the thing that surprised me the most, because it was almost nowhere in the literature, was polluted areas. They are seen above areas that are contaminated, either biologically, chemically, or by nuclear waste. So that's very interesting.
It is very interesting. Yeah, there's a ecological element to this that we don't fully understand.
And it is scientifically proven. You can say that based on that paper.
Yep.
The other map I would like to show you is that. Oh, she's very low. Yeah, it's that one. These are all the points that do not fit in the hypothesis.
Okay, so they have tested it, and yeah.
We don't know why they are here. It means there is something else that attracts UFOs, and we don't know what does that correlate.
Okay. So they've looked for some kind of common denominator between all of these points on the map, and there's nothing that links them, or even a subsection of them as well.
We don't know.
Yeah, they don't know.
There is something weird on this spot. There are no ballistic missiles, no nuclear waste, no pollution, no density population, and still we have data that is very concentrated. There is nothing there. Absolutely nothing.
I think this is, well, the subject itself is a big unknown to start with. So I think even when you delve into the data and you can find certain correlations, I'm sure that they'll get to a point where there will be more data where you'll have to hold your hands up and just go, I have no idea.
To be honest, we lack hypothesis. We don't know what to test to explain these points, because when we look at it, there is nothing there. So maybe it's underground, maybe it's above ground, but there is something weird there. It's a kind of noise in the data, but noise that are so concentrated means there is something unexplained.
You just haven't worked out what it is yet. Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I'm going to look at this myself. It's I'm going to read this. I just haven't seen it before.
It's a tool. It's a tool. You can have the algorithm. If you have enough cases on an area, you can create your own map, no problem. It's a very good tool.
Wow. This is the kind of thing that other countries either should have been doing or maybe have been doing in secret. So who knows what other information out there?
That part is a good question, because I don't have access to everything in France, and there is a whole part of the research I won't have access anyway. It's by the DIA, the secret army, the secret weapons development and I will never have access to that.
Oh yeah,
But,
yeah. You get to a level where there will be a sort of restriction on information, and that's understandable.
yes.
But even just from that level, from the two maps that you've showed there, that would be interesting to see if there was a similar correlation between the types of areas that you were mentioning in other countries. In other developed countries, so let's say in Germany, or let's say in Italy, or even in the UK, or if you saw it in Canada or America, that would be interesting to see a similar sort of type of map.
That's the next part of the project, is to have, there is a tool that has been mothballed by the government, that is called OSPAN, but really poorly known, and that can do that, but on the entire globe.
Okay.
You just have to feed him data and databases,
right, yeah.
and he creates the map, and with temporal effects, something we don't have on that map. That map is like 50 years of data correlated together.
So will that be open source in that case, so people can add to it?
I don't think it would be open source, because it would be dangerous, because we have to store the identity of the person that reports the data.
Fair enough.
And the identity is protected by the French CNIL, that is really strong. You don't want to mess around with the CNIL. They will strike very heavily.
I've heard about the privacy in France. Yes, yeah, I've read about that.
It's more a fortress, a good fortress. So I don't think. I think the base will be open source, so you can see how the data is calculated, but the entire databases would have to be protected. You can't spread out information to anyone like that. But that's the plan for the next. Graham, I loved that talk. I really loved talking to you.
Thank you. Yeah,
it's the first time we meet, in fact, and I heard and I translated some of your interventions, and I really liked how you think, and I really appreciated this talk.
Well, thank you, Baptiste, because I've seen you also on different channels, and I like the way that your thought processes run. I like the way that a Frenchman can speak in perfect English, better than sometimes I can speak English, being a Geordie, and that it was just somebody who I clicked with, even though I hadn't spoke to you, that I sort of recognized the kindred spirit. So I was really happy when you invited me to speak tonight. So thank you very much. I do appreciate that.
Oh, I think that I honestly, I don't care about the video. If it has success, good. If it doesn't, I don't care. Honestly. I think it's important for history that we show that at that time we were thinking that to the best of our abilities, and it leaves a trace for after. That's why I work on that. I think it's really important that we show that there wasn't just kooks or lunatics that were into these topics, and some took the time to think about it at the best of their abilities.
I agree totally. Yeah, we need to look at it seriously every so often, and just break things down with no fuss, nothing sort of going on in the background, and just people having an honest, decent, serious conversation, and then just pulling things to bits. And if we get the answers, great. If we don't, well, we're still giving it a go. So yes,
that's the best we can do, I think.
Exactly,
and we can be proud if we can do that.
Very true. Thank you, Baptiste.
Graham, see you next time.
Yeah,
I will let you choose the topic next time.
Okay. All right.
Warn me so I can prepare all the documents before. But I think that will be very interesting.
Okay.
See you next time.
Au revoir.
Goodbye.